Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about character design and dynamic poses in Clip Studio Paint presented by Syertse or Sasha. Due to time constraints, not all the questions will be answered. This webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. We'll have a Q&A session during the last 15 minutes. Please use the question panel to send all your comments, suggestions, or doubts. We have a chat, but we'll use it to send some information to all of you. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared on social media and via email to all registrants and attendees. The panelists for this webinar are Maria Quiñones, myself, and Sasha or Syertse. For those of you who connect with us for the very first time or have never heard about Clip Studio Paint, Clip Studio Paint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more at clipstudio.net/n or graphicsly.com. Also, we invite you to share Instagram stories using the hashtag webinar at Syertse, at Graphicsly, at Wacom, and at Clip Studio Official. We'll be sharing your stories if you tag us. Syertse is a full-time freelance art illustrator who also shares her art process on her Twitch stream. Her art journey started from a young age, which led her to pursue art in college and graduate with a BFA in illustration. Since then, she has been creating illustrations for products, promotion, collaborations, and more. In addition to that, she also traveled to shows around the US to share her art in person. So with that, I will leave you with Sasha and her presentation, Character Design and Dynamic Poses in Clip Studio Paint. Thank you so much.
Hello, welcome. Hopefully you can see my screen now, right?
Yes, all working.
Good, wonderful. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to my webinar today. I'm very excited to share this stuff with you. I did some preparation, so hopefully we can get through a lot of it. We are limited in time, of course. The webinar is an hour long and, most of it, and then we're gonna have a question section at the end. So I really wanna kind of go over the topics that I want to cover in this webinar. So as we know, this webinar is going to be focused partially on character design, and then secondary, we're going to go into dynamic poses with characters. So let's start off with character design. So just from the beginning, I just want to note that character design can do a lot of different things. When we think of character design, we can think of character design for animation, for video games, for films and TV shows and stuff like that, right? So there's a huge spectrum of it. I will only be going over a specific spectrum of it. So I hope that you will enjoy that. So I really wanted to focus on how to design a character that's specifically for you. So here are some of the different things that I'm kind of considering when doing this character design presentation. So there's lots of different ways to create a character, and maybe you're looking to create a manga or a webtoon with a character. You're going to try to focus on certain things. Maybe it's for a personal OC, something that you want to draw all the time. Maybe it's for a story that you're creating, but maybe you're writing the story. That could be different from something like a comic or a webtoon. And then lastly, maybe something like a persona. Maybe it's a drawing of yourself that you use for a YouTube video, or maybe it's a design of a VTuber that you want to kind of embody. I'm taking all of these into consideration when going over the different character aspects that I want to discuss. Okay, so here are some character designs that I drew up pretty quickly. And each of them have a different aspect that I want to touch on with this stream. So for the reference, I used the same base for each one, and I kind of wanted to go over the different ways that clothing, hairstyle, and textures kind of change the way that you perceive a character. Basically, what I want to do is kind of go over each one differently and see and explain how the design caters to different aspects of it. And then overall, what I want to say is that there's no like limit to which kind of ways you want to go over it. So you can take aspects from this character's design and this character's design and mix and match them in different ways that you want. So I don't want you guys to feel like, oh, like this has to be one way, like this character has to be only for story purposes, or this character has to be, you know, only for detail purposes and stuff like that. A lot of this content is kind of structured to use in different ways for what you want, and you can mix and match it however you want. Okay, so starting off, we're going to go from left to right. This one, I started off with the design thinking about stories. So story is kind of like a big thing that people always consider when doing character designs, right? If you're doing a comic or a webtoon, like you're considering the story when you're designing the character. So for this one, I really wanted to go over different questions that you would kind of answer with the character design. You know, when you're taking a look at the character, you're thinking, oh, what environment is she in? What kind of personality does she have? Does she have some kind of goal, or maybe she works a certain job? You know, these questions can be answered when looking at a character design. So for example, here, when I was drawing this kind of outfit, this design, I was thinking of her as a kind of adventurer. In my thought process, I kind of considered how maybe she has different layers that she uses for different elements, right? Because when you're an adventurer, you're going to lots of different places, you're going into lots of different environments. So you kind of need to have layers to kind of switch and adjust to your surroundings. So for example, here I have these goggles, and I imagine maybe she's going out into a sandstorm. Sometimes she needs to wear those goggles, right? And then we have the scarf here. And when I think about a scarf or something like that, you can consider it to be just an element for warmth, but you can also consider how this scarf can be utilized to cover her face in a sandstorm, right? There's different ways that it could be applied. Same with the layers. Right now, she has a tank top underneath, but she has this big jacket over her. So she can tie that around her waist if it's hot, or she can put it on her shoulders if it's cold. Similar to the pants here, it's kind of not super noticeable, but I do have this layer underneath here. So I imagine she's kind of wearing shorts underneath, right? Same thing. If maybe she needs to go jump in the water for a moment or something like that, she can just take off a layer and kind of feel comfortable in that way. Let's see. So then I was also thinking about how the character would look when you see them at first glance. I'm not sure how you guys feel about this character, but I do feel like she's kind of maybe spontaneous. Maybe for me, at least, something about her hair is very like fun and whimsical. She has these what are they, gloves, fingerless gloves on. So maybe you imagine that she's using her hands a lot in different areas where she needs them to be covered because they're getting all scuffed up. Maybe she's, I don't know, using a sword or a shovel or something along those lines. Like all of these questions can at least semi be answered by this character design. Okay, so let's move on to this middle one here. And this middle one, I like to think of it as the design aspect. So what I mean by design, I mean design is a very open-ended word, right? But for me, design is just like graphical visual, right? So if this is telling a story, maybe we're not sure about the story here, but we know that the visual is striking. It's different. It's something that you know, we can see from far away. If we were to darken this out, we could see a clear silhouette, right? And she could be memorable even from a distance. I also think design is a good aspect for characters that maybe aren't in a story, but are maybe just are visually there. As you guys might know, if you're familiar with the VTubers, the design aspect of VTubers is very important because it has to be something that's unique and something that's memorable. So then here I have some notes on creating a good design of character, or maybe just things to consider when you're considering the specific artistic design of a character. So asymmetry, shapes, colors, and silhouette. These are all pretty general words, but if you really think about it, if you're just considering each of these individually just a little bit, I think overall it'll form a good character design. For me, especially when I was thinking about this design, I was thinking about asymmetry. And asymmetry is a really fun way to make a character look unique. Oftentimes in the world in general, we find kind of symmetry to be beautiful. But there's also so much beauty in having something that's asymmetrical but is still balanced. And that's the challenge when doing an asymmetrical design, is you want to make sure that the asymmetry looks intentional. It doesn't look haphazard, like you accidentally did it. It kind of needs to be shown that it's intentional, that you planned it, that this is the way that this character looks because I wanted to, not because it's by accident, for example, right? And one way to make it look intentional, or maybe a few ways, let me just go over really quickly. There's a few ways to make this look intentional. So for me, the biggest asymmetrical design for this character, I imagine for a lot of you guys too, is this very sideways jacket. She's got a pointed shoulder. This whole section is so big that it's kind of covering her face a little bit, right? And then it slides off to the left. So we have a very left heavy shirt that she's wearing, right? And that could be a lot for a certain character design. However, we are now balancing out with different aspects of the design that are around this area, right? So if this shirt is big, right, the other side is small. But now we have her hair, and now it's leaning to the right. And now we have this big kind of glove section that is also on the right hand side, right? So now we're evening things out. We have a big section to the left, but we have other sections that move to the right. It's same with here. We kind of have this covered, but now this is leaning down to the right. And then we have this tiny section here that's a little, like, I imagine it's like a little open area or a diamond shape, but now we have these shapes on the left-hand side. They're not the same at all. And in some contexts, of course, you can do this too, you know, make it symmetrical. But we do have some symmetry in here already, and that is with the boots. The boots are symmetrical and the bottoms are symmetrical, but they're mirrored, right? So we have this kind of mirrored section here. And this kind of makes it feel like there is purpose to it, like, oh yeah, I can make mirrored, you know, like symmetrical designs if I want to. I'm choosing to make this asymmetrical and even it out with a short glove here and a long glove here, you know. And of course, these head things right here. Sorry, I'm drawing all over. I hope you guys can see this properly. But these head elements here, these kind of hair pieces, are also symmetrical. So the top here is symmetrical, the bottom here is symmetrical, and kind of all up here is where the asymmetry happens. So even that's a little bit more composed, if that makes sense. There is like a little bit of a feeling and intuition to asymmetrical designs, but I think it's a pretty good way to make a character look distinct or unique. Oh, so sorry. Okay, let's move over to the right one now. So this right one is the one that I drew, where I considered not only these other two things like story and design, but I also considered textures and small details in a design. So textures, small nuances, and readability. Yes, readability is also quite important. This one kind of almost feeds into these two in a certain way, like because there's no color, it's a little bit harder to read if there's any textures or anything like that. Obviously, for me, in my eyes, this would be like a shiny fabric, right? Most of this would be shiny, so there's not as much detail going on in the texture. However, here I could see this maybe being like, this is a jean or corduroy texture, but this is like a smooth fabric, you know, maybe this is all dinged up. It's got some like rough edges to it, right? So this kind of feeds into the other two as well. But here I wanted to focus on different textures and how you can play with them to make a unique design. So here I drew this kind of puffer jacket. I imagine this is like, you know, when you're when it's chilly outside, but it's not too chilly, so you just put it over your regular clothes. It's kind of like a more shiny material. And then she's layering it over this turtleneck sweater with the little ridges on it. So that's already a different texture that we're layering on. And then we have this long skirt. And I imagine that it's kind of this light fabric material that maybe fades out. If you can see, her legs are kind of peeking through here. So it's fading out at the bottom. You can kind of see through it here. And then we go down. The socks obviously are kind of just soft sock texture, but I imagine maybe the shoes are kind of a shiny brown, you know, kind of stereotypical schoolgirl shoe. And so we have these different textures that are kind of going all about, and maybe they can tell you more about the character. Maybe you can tell that she's, you know, kind of maybe a fashionista, maybe not. Maybe she's going to school because she's wearing this skirt. Maybe she's it's chilly out because she's kind of covered up. I imagine maybe this is like a fall outfit or something like that. All of these things can be kind of readable in a glance, hopefully, with these different character designs. Oops, I did not mean to do that. Yeah, so here I wrote mix and matching textures and patterns. And this could be said for all of these. I think it's really fun if you are doing character designs to mix and match different things, or at least consider the textures and the patterns when doing a character design. I know a lot of the times we kind of focus on the colors and maybe the shapes of the clothing. Silhouette is very important too, where you kind of see the different edges. Maybe the top is really big, but the bottoms are really tight, or vice versa. You know, that's a common thing with fashion in general. So, but consider textures and patterns as well. That could really make your design stand out if that's something you're looking for. And really quickly to cover this, now that we've discussed some different character design elements, we can feed back into this with the designing a character for you specifically. And what I mean by that is if you're making a character for, say, a comic or a webtoon, you're going to consider these aspects, but maybe you're going to avoid having too many textures or too many small nuances, because this is a character that you're going to be redrawing constantly over and over and over again. So maybe design is one of the biggest aspects that you want to consider for this character. Are they readable from very far away? Are they clear and distinct even when they're simplified? Oftentimes, webtoons or manga use chibified characters as well. So you kind of have to know how to simplify them even more than they already are. Maybe consider how maybe that character has a really distinct feature. For example, this character's distinct feature is that she's pointy. That's kind of how I see it in my head. She's maybe a little futuristic or something like that, but she's very pointy. That's something that I notice about her immediately, right? So these are things to consider, but maybe you want to stay away from drawing a billion tiny little lines that are super important to your character design, because you're just not going to want to do that. However, if you're doing something, for example, a persona or a VTuber, maybe an art that you're reusing over and over, or maybe a character design that you're using for illustrations where you want to show off that nuance of sketches and tiny little details, and maybe you are going to want to focus more on the details of the character design. So maybe, for example, let's see, instead of having these kind of simplified pearl earrings, right, you could instead have these like star, moon kind of things. And then later it's found out that each one of these tiny little stars on her earring resembles a different, you know, cat that she has later on in the story, right? So you can get away with doing these fun little nuances in these character designs, and really have it be kind of thought through, very intentional design, as I said before. It's all very fun, and you know, I think at the end you just want to have fun with it. You also probably want to consider what you like drawing. For me, I like to draw a lot of different things, or I like to see a lot of different things, but I don't always want to draw a very angular design. I don't always want to try to recreate 100 billion frills on a character design, but maybe that's something that you want to do. So consider what you want to draw as well, and how you're going to be using the character when getting to that point. Okay, I know we're running through pretty fast, but I did have a note here to do 20 minutes specifically on character design. So we're at the 20-minute mark. So we're going to switch over now to dynamic poses. Yay! So now we have this character in mind, right? Maybe you guys are already thinking about your own character designs. Maybe you're thinking about who you want to create. I'm not sure, but now we're going to put them in cool poses, basically. I'm gonna kind of go over the different things that I want to touch on, and then I will show off the different ways that it's applied in my art, and then we're gonna try to end off with sketching a dynamic pose from scratch. So things that I want to note on in this kind of dynamic pose discussion is action and movement. A lot of times we think about action in just the pose itself, the person. We're thinking about like, see, here we go. Like here would be the pose. A lot of people start off with drawing characters completely like they're just their figure. And I think that's a good way to start in some aspects. But for example, with this character here, a huge part of her design is her outfit, is her huge dress, is her huge shoes, is her huge sword, right? So I would recommend at least considering the outfit that the character is going to be in before you draw, because this alone, I feel like it's a decent pose, you know, but altogether, it's creating a much more dynamic pose. And that's also because I'm not just using the person themselves as the action, but I'm also using the accessories. So for example, her hair is wisping over both ways. The what is this called? I don't know. This bow on her back is moving. You can tell there's wind kind of coming from the right side, moving to the left. Her dress is wisping up in the air. So all of these things are adding to the action and the movement, and they're not even directly connected to her physical body necessarily, right? But they create so much movement. So please consider that. Yeah, another thing is silhouettes and body triangles in specific. I'll go over this more clear in a few other examples, but silhouette is super important. It's basically what you see at a glance. So I'm just going to zoom out really fast. Now it's harder to see this image, right? But we can still kind of see the silhouette, how it looks like from a distance, where the edges are of the background to the character. And body triangles are just different ways that the body creates triangles. This is actually something that models use as well when they're posing for photographs. They create lots of triangles with their body to make the photo look dynamic. We're also going to talk about pushing perspective. So not just the act of there being perspective, but making it pretty distinct. And then readability as well. When you're drawing this pose, is it clear to read? Is it kind of or is it kind of muddled, right? So let's go over. The first example I have is just this blue angel, and I wanted to show this because of it's just the head. It's the head and the shoulders. It's basically a bust shot, but it still shows a level of thinking about dynamic posing when it's drawing it. So when I drew it, I suppose. So yeah, here we focus on a little bit on perspective, angle, and shape. I think shape is a big one for this one actually, because of the way that I kind of filled in the blues of the hair. They're all kind of one shape, so it has to be very distinct what shape I'm creating with them. So we have different angles here, and I did an overdrawing already. It's pretty jank, but hopefully you can understand just how the different head angles are distinct and make it more dynamic rather than a head-on. So we have 2 3/4 views, but this one is kind of looking, I would say midway. Maybe she's looking a little bit down on you. However, this one is a 3/4 view where she's looking slightly up at you. And I really like this one because we have this kind of top-down look where we see the underside of her chin, and then we show her her neck, and then we show her shoulders. So we have all of this section here. It feels like a very sassy, distinct pose, and we have this nice smooth line over here that I feel like is a very distinct. Oops. So yeah, these are some of the things that you can consider when drawing just bust shots, right? The other thing to consider is the shapes, right? So specifically the shapes of the hair in these, I think, are important to the design. They kind of frame the face in a way that is distinct. It's not following just the curves of her head. It's not flowing just down. It can, but having it kind of flow outwards and have this volume means that you can add more dynamicness, if that's right, to the pose with, like I said before, accessories, things that aren't just her body, but that add a lot of flavor and punch to the design. Let's go on to the next one. Here I drew an autumn witch. And for this one, it's kind of we're not using much perspective here, right? It's pretty head on. Everything's the same size, you know, her head's not closer than her feet or anything like that. It's very head on. So we have other ways to create dynamicism. Is that right? I don't know. Dynamics instead. So we are using the silhouette again. We are using negative space, and then the readability is something that goes over it too. So here's how the silhouette looks. I can even take this away, and now we can see how it looks without any of the detail. And I would say that in terms of reading this silhouette, I would say it's 80% there. I do have some gripes with how her hand is completely hidden by her hair in the silhouette, so you can't see that other one. However, you can see this one. But I do like the readability of her hat. You know, we have these distinct ears here, and we can kind of see there's a little bit of a gap here, so we can see that these are shoes and that she has maybe these like big, I don't know, traveler shoes on. The cat is also pretty readable because we do have gaps in between the feet. If I were to do this, for example, it starts to get a lot more muddy what the design is, right? It's not too bad, but seeing these distinct shapes, then you can see both the whiskers as well is important. And then, yeah. And readability, I guess, is the last one. And what I mean by readability is, again, how you see it from a distance. Is it clear what's going on here, or does it feel like you really need to zoom in to see what's going on? And then let's move on to this last one here. This is the magical girl drawing that I did. It was also in the Costume Paint, or I'm sorry, Graphics League promotions. And I feel like this one kind of hits a lot of the elements that I discussed earlier as well. And that is, I'll show you. It's perspective, it's silhouette, negative space, and readability. And here I can show body triangles as well that I'm using, right? So we can see that I feel like perspective is a pretty big one in this piece in particular. We do have her reaching out here. Her hand is reaching out, so we're having this be closer to the camera, or so to speak. And then her legs, right? We're going from her thighs all the way back here to now her feet. Are they even bigger than her head? They might be bigger than her head, right? Like, this is not normal perspective, but it does show this design. It shows that she's floating even more because she has her feet up in the distance. You see that both of them underneath, you know, they're in the air. So it's kind of important. And the good thing about this kind of design as well is that when you do the silhouette, I would say that it's pretty readable. You can see that these are shoes right away. They're pretty big in the thing. And then you can see the fingers, you know, they're not overlapping her body, so you can't see them from far away. They're in the spaces on the sides. You can see even the shape of her head right here, because we do have this gap in between her chin and her shoulder a little bit. So you can even see the silhouette of her face and see the angle of her head without even seeing any of the details. Ooh. And these are important aspects to consider when drawing a dynamic pose, is to have things be readable even in their most simplified form. let's see, let's bring this back for a moment. Yeah, so perspective and silhouette we went over, negative space and readability. So let me just quickly discuss the body triangles that I was talking about. So for example, basically it's just creating triangles in different ways with the limbs and the body of a human character, most likely, or maybe unhuman, whatever you want, you know. And so for example, we could have this arm go straight out, and actually this will create a different triangle, right? But we instead have two triangles. We have 1 and 2 here. We have this big triangle here, which is important because if these legs were together instead, for example, if these two were together, not only would this take away a little bit of the dynamics of the pose, but it would also take away from the silhouette. Imagine if this silhouette, instead of being like this, was like this, right? It doesn't seem like a huge change, but suddenly you don't understand what this area is. Sure, it's two legs together. You can understand that if you see the full illustration, right? But in the silhouette, you're like, oh, maybe this is like, I don't know, maybe it's a hot dog. Who knows, right? Like maybe it's a little hot dog guy hanging out here. That's not a good example, but you know what I mean. And so having that space in there is surprisingly very important, right? And maybe that's something that you don't necessarily consider when drawing illustrations or drawings of your characters. Yeah, and yeah, readability. I think readability falls into that as well as being able to understand everything at a glance. Even the fingers here, I think, are quite important. It's the same aspect with the legs being together. If these fingers were together, it would be much harder to read it overall. But we do have these gaps, and they are different as well. Sometimes when you use the same size of triangles, right? We're talking a lot about triangles now, but if you use the same size of triangles over and over, it starts to look monotonous, right? So for example, if all of these fingers were spread evenly, right, like this, then it would almost look unnatural. For one reason or another, you know, because that's kind of how nature works with natural elements. With, you know, structural things like buildings, you kind of want that evenness. But in terms of naturalness, you kind of want to not have everything be the same exact size or gap apart. For example, here, different sections of her hair. This one's big, this one's small, and then we go into even smaller chunks. But again, this one's big, this one's small. These are all elements that you kind of have to consider when drawing things that are looking natural, because I would argue, a lot worse if everything was like this, right? If everything was the same size, it would look unnatural and maybe not as thought through, right? If her hair was, you know. And even then we have the gaps here that are different sizes, so it kind of adds a little bit of dynamics to it. Hopefully that made sense. It is a lot to go over, but I hope it was kind of clear, at least, what I wanted to share. And this last portion, I'm gonna speed draw some, maybe one if I'm lucky to, dynamic poses. A little tip from me, which helps me at least, is that sometimes if I'm like unsure about what to draw or like how to draw it, I'll put on another artwork for myself on the side. It's kind of there for moral support for me. So I have this drawing here. It's not like a completely empty page. Even the background's not pure white. You can see it's a little bit like off colored. And all of that really helps me to feel more comfortable with drawing, because it's kind of like a reminder. It's like, oh, I've done this once before. I've done it twice before. Like, I can do it. Why not? So that kind of helps me out. And I do a lot of flipping when I draw. I don't know if you guys do that. I think it is good to flip, but maybe I flip a little too much. I flip too early, maybe. But flipping a canvas, basically, it's to help make sure that everything is proportional. Our eyes kind of get used to the drawing and don't see any mistakes after a while of seeing it in one way. So flipping the canvas makes it pretty clear. I'm sure we've all had this moment where we're drawing this drawing, we think it looks great, everything's amazing, we flip it and the eye is like 6 feet to the right. You know, it's just not right. And you're like, huh, how did I not notice that? It's a little more challenging with traditional, but sometimes what you can do is actually look at it in a mirror. You can take the piece of paper and like go to a mirror and look at it there and be like, oh, the eye is too far to the right, and then you have to deal with that in traditional form. So good luck with that. At least with digital, you can just use the lasso tool and, you know, place it over and be happy. But here, so I'm kind of just doodling. I think a lot of the beginning portions are just kind of winging it until you feel comfortable. But I think one good thing about starting with a dynamic pose is starting with the character's face not being head on. It's not super easy, especially if you're not comfortable with drawing 3/4 views. But I think having the character be in 3/4 already gives you like a leg up. Because sometimes, like, even if the body is like rotated but the face is head on, it can still look kind of stiff sometimes. Not always, but it's a bit more of a challenge to get there. Casually gonna restart. Sometimes it happens. I think it was okay, but could be better. Here, and I think another thing to consider when drawing dynamic pose is using quick, fast lines. It's going to be a lot harder for you to get a dynamic pose if you are mulling over the same line over and over again. It's going to start to look stiff for sure. So keep it to the wispy, fast kind of lines, and then that way you can kind of have happy accidents sometimes too, where you're like, oh, I didn't mean for that to be there, but it actually looks pretty good, you know. And that way it's a lot more readable too. I think that's also why sometimes a lot of us have trouble with doing line art and having it become pretty, what's the word, like a little bit flatter, a little bit duller after you do the line art. You know, the sketch has so much movement to it, and then you do the line art and you're like, well, not so much, or at least less, right? I think part of that is kind of condensing these lines so they look cleaner, but at the same time you're losing that movement, these tiny little nuances of the arm shape being like this rather than like this, right? You know, and all of these things play a part in how the image looks overall. This is such a silly pose. I don't know what's going on. It feels like the Mario pose, you know, where he's like, wahoo, and he hits the question mark. It's fine. That's a pretty dynamic pose. We're creating nice, good triangles here, right? That's how I'm gonna view this. It's these nice body triangles. When I first found out about the body triangles, I think I found out about it through like modeling like TV show, probably something along the lines of like America's Next Top Model or something like that, right? Where it's like, oh, you know, they're creating shapes with their limbs and body and stuff like that. And only much later did I realize that that was very, very applicable to art as well. I think in the moment I was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm never going to use it for, you know, this though. And I probably should have earlier on anyway. And I think because I'm not considering the character that I'm drawing right now, it's kind of just a character that I'm not drawing the outfit, but I think the outfit would be good to at least sketch in when you're doing the pose, right? Maybe we draw one of these guys. Let's draw her. Okay. She's acting strong, you know. And she has a lot of elements to add emotion to, which is nice. She has like multiple different hair thingies, and she's got these details on her head. These little pigtails that look kind of like, I don't know, they look silly to me. It's kind of like a kind of goofy vibe. Maybe I imagine her going out into the sandstorm right now. The wind's blowing and there's sand in her eyes or something like that. And she's like, ugh, but I'm still strong. I'm still tough. She's wincing a little bit. But she's still tough, so she's got the kind of determined, angry eyebrows, maybe a little tongue cheeky action. And then her scarf, kind of going over it. And I love using scarves as like a way to add a cool silhouette to it because it's so bulky a lot of the time. Scarves are so bulky and they can be super long or super short. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of play around with that, which I think is really fun. Also, don't say I didn't tell you guys, or don't say I told you guys, but you can also use little tiny like design elements to hide things that you don't want to draw as much. And I'm not promoting, you know, not drawing it. I think you should learn how to draw things that you want to draw often, right? But if you're, for example, drawing a webtoon and you really hate drawing ears, don't give yourself a character where their ears are completely, you know, shown off all the time. Don't do that to yourself. Give them like long hair or at least like poofy hair that kind of covers their body, or I'm sorry, not their body, their ears, right? You know, you can play to your strengths as well while also learning what you're doing, and nobody's going to be mad at you. Nobody's going to be like, oh, how dare you not draw the ears? I really wanted to see those. Like, if somebody says that to you, I don't know what to tell you. That's a really interesting comment. But yeah, just find your strengths. I think that's a really fun thing to do as well. Is like you don't have to be a master of everything to do what you want to do. A lot of people, especially, wait to do stuff because they think they're not ready. But a lot of people aren't ready. A lot of, you know, super popular artists don't know how to do certain things or need help with it or avoid things, you know. And I think that's very fair and valid, is that we're all just kind of learning and figuring stuff out as we go. Especially when we're doing things like character design where everything is, you know, figuring it out as we go, and maybe your first two passes aren't right and then you sleep on it, and then the next pass you're like, oh my god, this is the character that I've been wanting all along, this is who I've envisioned forever, and then you're stuck with them and you're like so happy. It feels good actually, to design a character and you feel like, oh, this is right, this feels like me for some reason. um Sometimes you're like, yeah, this feels like semi-right. I think sometimes it's easy to be influenced by other people's designs a little too much, in that you draw things in their way because it looks cool. And don't get me wrong, there's so many different cool designs, but it doesn't fit you. And so when you draw the design yourself, you're like, why does this not feel like me? I think it is important to consider your own voice and not take too much inspiration from outside sources, you know? My sketching style is quite haphazard, especially since I'm quite strict on time here. But I hope you can visualize the thing that I'm going for. Actually, I kind of want to put this here. Her leg is now going up, and that's going to show raw athleticism because it's, you know, kind of difficult to be in this pose. Can we visualize it? She looks pretty tough, right? I don't know if the silhouette's so good in this. A lot of it's jumbled up. We can kind of create more of a silhouette with here, I think. Kind of cover this. But we do have some triangles, right? Did I forget any aspects of her? I guess her bag, but I'm not worried about her bag. Put it off to the side. There it is, laying on the floor. She's so quirky that she forgets her bag everywhere. That's an element of her design that I've just decided on. So yeah, sorry it's a little bit loose and goofy, I guess. But you know, this is also something to consider. Maybe you're doing multiple of these a day and then you start to feel more comfortable with creating designs and dynamic poses. Here's some triangles to show off. Wow, a triangle here. Wow, a triangle here. Wow, a triangle here. Wow, maybe even a triangle here. You know, something like that. Okay, I think that concludes everything that I wanted to go over. Mario, if you're ready to do some questions, I am.
Well, thank you so much, Sasha, for this amazing presentation. We
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
it a lot. There's a lot of people. You have no idea how many questions we have.
Oh
I
man.
think we are breaking records. So thank all of you who joined us live.
Yeah, thank you
And
everyone for being here.
yeah, we asked at the beginning from which part of the world were you watching us. So, for example, Aleta from South Africa, area from
Ah,
UK, Philippines, Joan, Alberta, Canada, Imre, Oli, London, Alabama, Stephen, a lot of people from the US, Poland, Piotr, Lithuania, Inesa, etc., etc. So thank all of you, and yeah, let's get started with some questions.
yeah.
For example, James, he says, any tips on drawing hair?
Hi, James. Thank you for that question. I love drawing hair. Like I said before, it adds so much life to a design or to a pose. Um, Tips on hair for me, especially with the aspect of this kind of webinar, is to create the hair initially in chunks. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a style where everything, like the hair is very fine and you can see all the details. Absolutely, you can do that. But you can consider, let me see where this is. There we go. First, creating the hair in big chunks and then separating small chunks from them. So for example, here we have these big chunks of hair, right? And that makes it very readable, even from a distance, rather than, for example, if it was like this, right? This is also okay, but since the spacing of each one is so similar, it starts to look unnatural. So the first thing that you kind of want to go for is to have the spacing be different and have large chunks mixed with big chunks. So we have these tiny little slivers of hair that are kind of like stray hairs, for example, mixed in with large clumps of hair that are actually supposed to be there. So same thing here, we have these large clumps which make up the majority of her pigtail. And then we have these kind of stray hairs. So we have one stray hair here, and we see how this hair kind of gets smaller and gets bigger again. So why hair does this? I'm not sure if it's, you know, this thing has been gone over quite plenty, but the reason why it gets smaller and then bigger is, imagine like a ribbon, right? When we draw a ribbon, it kind of gets smaller and bigger, right? And in some aspects, it can even become flat. Like this could be the ribbon too, right? Because we're seeing it from the perspective of just the side, right? So that's why hair can go from thick to thin to thick very intensely, and that using all of those trips and tricks and tips, I guess, will help you to make more dynamic hair. I hope that helped.
And also we received a lot of love from people. For example, Devin says, thank you for having this webinar. It was super helpful. Imre, no questions what to say. It was great, really talented.
Oh, so happy to hear
Um,
that.
Who else? Nick says, thank you so much, Syertse, for taking the time to present this webinar. Your art is beautiful. And
Oh, thank
so
you.
let's go with one question from Olivia from Poland. She says, what gets you inspired and where do you look for references? Love from Poland.
Oh, from Poland. Wow, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. What gets me inspired? and where do I take inspiration from? So obviously, anime and Japanese media is a big inspiration for me. I think it's very clear in my artwork that it shows. So for me, a big inspiration is actually character design, specifically in like anime RPGs. Actually, for me, that's one of my favorite things. They're so expressive, especially a lot of the like more not like big games, if that makes sense. They have these super cool designs of like giant scarves and blades and uh belts and stuff like that I think are so expressive. If you want to search this up, Yggdra, oh my gosh, Dra Union. I think I'm spelling this wrong, but maybe it's two Y's. I remember buying this when this video game when I was a kid, and like I only bought it for the cover art because obviously that's how you buy stuff when you're a kid, right? And then I saw the character designs and they were so crazy cool. I was like, it is like the definition for me of like flowy and movement and stuff like that. So a lot of the cool like JRPGs have really, really fun stuff that I feel inspired by. And then just other artists as well. I mean, I go to conventions and stuff like that, and going to conventions, you see a lot of different artists and artist alley, and oh my god, there's so much to soak in person as well. You're not just seeing it on a screen, you're seeing it printed or sometimes even like traditional art. So it feels so inspirational to see other artists and seeing them flourish as well. And I think that's it for that one.
Thank you. Okay, let me check. There are so many questions. One of them is, what is your favorite Clip Studio Paint tool, or what speeds your work, that makes your life easier?
That's a good question because I do have quite a bit. I think one of my favorite things about Clip Studio Paint is that I can lay stuff out. So you can kind of see everything here. And I mean, lay stuff out, like lay it out in the way that I'm used to. I think a lot of people have their layout quite different from mine, but this feels so comfortable to me, right? So here I can switch between different tools, which I feel comfortable in. But also I have this quick access tool section here. And these right here are my most used tools. So I do have the symmetrical ruler, for example. I can easily click this, and then suddenly I'm drawing symmetry. And this is great for, things like flowers, stars, and stuff like that. But also when you're drawing faces, it's really easy. And having all of these different things, right? I use the flip tool a lot right here, the flip canvas tool. And I just have it here, so it's super easy to get to. Then I have different color aspects here, so I can switch. For example, I want to make this drawing super red. I can do that here, and then easy peasy, the art director is like, no, I want this red. I'm gonna do it here. Probably not, but you know what I mean. So the quick access tool just section in general is so useful for me. Personally, and the symmetry tool, I use the not just the symmetrical ruler but also the perspective ruler. I've used this for quite a few pieces, and I'm surprised by how like easy it is to use. For some reason you can't see this here, but let's see. Yeah, there you go. It makes it so that you draw only in the section that you create, like the vanishing point that you create. So if you're drawing a room or something like that, oh my gosh, this makes the process so much faster. You don't have to like be like, oh, maybe this line is wrong. No, if you do the basics of putting the points in the place that you want, and you can even reference photographs for that to follow those lines, you're gonna get the right line every single time, and that speeds the process up immensely. Yeah, those are some of my favorite tools in Clip Studio Paint.
Well, thank you so much. Here's another question from Serial. Your art style is what I aspire to. It's so pretty. My problem is that I always make my art look flat, making it less impactful. How do you visualize the art as a whole, also considering the background? Thank you so much.
Oh, I see. It looks flat. I wonder why that is. there's different ways that it could be looking flat and different ways that I avoid it. Sometimes flat is okay, depending on what you want, but I'm assuming you don't want to do that. So for example, this may look flat in some aspects, and that's because it has very limited lighting. But even here, you can kind of see that even in these like shapes of skin tone, we have these highlights, right? So I think a big part of something looking flat versus not flat is the lighting. And so even if you're doing small sketches or fully rendered illustrations, I think considering the lighting very early on in the process is going to be your best friend in that regard, because it's very easy to, especially when you first start out, to draw a piece of art, right? I'm wondering if I have any. Let's see here. Draw a piece of art and then start shading it where you assume the little shadows go, right? So for example, like, oh, the hair is covering the skin, so let me just shade right here, without considering that maybe there's a possibility that there's a huge like spotlight on her face, right? And the spotlight is going to take away any of those tiny little shadows. And then you can do this instead. Let's do color dodge, I don't know. It's like, oh, the spotlight's here. Her whole face is going to be in the light, you know, and then because that's the only light in the room, all of this part might be in shadow, for example. And then you can kind of see how it creates, color judge is the right one. Let's do, oh, okay, something like that, right? And now you're starting to see there's a hierarchy of like what is in front of what, maybe because the spotlight is right here, it's creating this like intense shadow on her neck, right? And going onto her shoulders. But then that area where her skin is showing again is going to be bright and white. And, you know, this is a very extreme example. But I think using light and considering it when drawing an illustration is going to make it go from what I imagine you're thinking as flat to really fully fleshed out, and using big blocks of light. You can always do little aspects after, right? You can always add tiny little shadows after, tiny little ones where you're like, oh, like the nose would be kind of like this, and then the lip is giving a shadow, but do those big ones first, because that's going to really give it that big punch, I think. Yeah.
We also want to thank all of you who are sharing your Instagram stories. And a repeated question is, if the webinar is going to be recorded, yes, please subscribe to our YouTube channel to get a notification once the recording is available to watch. Also, another question was, what's been your most favorite artwork and why that you have ever
Oh,
created?
my favorite artwork. Oh, that's challenging. You know, when I answer that question, sometimes I answer it with like my most recent one, because I really like want to focus on moving forward, right? I want to be like, oh, like my next piece is going to be my best piece. I'm always trying to top myself. Whether I do it or not is a different question, right? But let me share with you a couple that I feel like were monumental to me in my progress, for example. So let me just pull this up. And you let me know if for some reason you can't see this. Actually, I should be able to see it. Let's do this instead. Like that. So here is a piece that I did recently. This is a free run. And I feel like I really had fun with this for multiple reasons. And one of them is because it's really just fun to really clutter up an illustration with so much stuff. There's so many faces, there's so many things going on, but I also gave myself an extra challenge of doing references from the show, so that when people looked at this image, they were like, oh, I remember this episode, or I remember when she did this. And so it gave them this feeling of nostalgia, maybe, or like a, I don't know, familiarity, which I definitely wanted to implement in this artwork. And let me pull up one more that I feel like is a good example of something I was pretty proud of. And this one I drew a few years ago, and I really feel like, you know when sometimes you draw something and you're like, how did I do that? I still wonder how I did this. I drew this one in 2021. Oh my God, it's been so long. Um, and I think I was just so inspired by this concept of a greenhouse that I just really spent so much time and stuff like that on it. And this is the best example that I have of using the perspective tool, by the way, because without the perspective tool, this would have been a nightmare to draw. All of these beams that have to be like perfectly aligned, right? Like it's so easy to see if something is wrong with beams that are supposed to be perfectly parallel. But because I use the perspective tool, so much easier. And obviously there's some challenges here and there. Like for example, these beams can't be done in perspective of the thing because it doesn't follow this one. But overall, like having all of these aligned and stuff like that, oh, made my life so much easier. And you know, doing all the details and like planning out the different plants, is looking up different plants and different Pokemon that I wanted to add to it. And there's tiny little hidden stuff in here. You can see different things here. There's little Turtics sleeping. This is like a pink can from the game, stuff like that. Or I'm sorry, a pail, a water pail from the game. So yeah, I really feel like I really learned a lot with this piece.
Well, unfortunately, our time is limited, but we want to thank all of you who are still sending questions, and a lot of love also to Sasha. And before we go, just one last bit of suggestion about character design to anyone who's struggling.
Suggestions or like tips?
Yeah, last thoughts.
Last thoughts. I would say last thoughts is to have so much fun with it. Really just, you know, there's a lot of pressure going into designing stuff and creating characters and wanting them to be perfect. And I'm going to tell you now, it's never going to be perfect. And that's okay, because there's so much beauty in imperfection. There's so much beauty in the tiny little mistakes. You'd be surprised how many times like you draw something and it's kind of like wonky. And then later on you realize that like that's one of the most important parts of the piece, or like, you know, this little scribble turned out to be something that's super important to the character design like years later on, you know. So really just have fun with it. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, and remember that all of us are learning together.
Well, thank you so much, Sasha, for these wise words. And also, yeah, as I said, people loved your presentation. But before we go, we want to remind you that yes, this webinar it's being recorded, and so don't forget to subscribe to our Clip Studio Paint channel and Graphics Lead channel to get a notification. If you want to learn more about Clip Studio Paint, visit our website clipstudio.net/n and graphicslead.com. And for more information about Sasha, follow her as Syertse on Instagram, Twitch, Twitter. We say Twitter yet, and her website. So
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Add more stuff. Thank you so much, Sasha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I really hope that everyone got something out of it. And thank you again for having me, Mario.
Thank all of you, and we hope to see you next time. Stay tuned.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.